You've been a hostage for too long, a prisoner to an enemy you can't see or touch. But this enemy doesn't need weapons or walls to control you. It lives inside your mind, whispering that you're not enough, that you'll fail if you try, that the world is waiting to judge you. This intimate terrorist is fear. And if that description makes you uncomfortable, it should. Because you've lived with this parasite for so long that you've mistaken it for a part of yourself. You've accepted its constant presence as normal, natural, necessary. But I'm going to tell you something that will shake the foundations of your mental prison. Fear is not real. It exists only as a thought, a mental projection of a future that hasn't happened and likely never will. It's a mirage that the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche identified as the most primitive form of cowardice disguised as prudence. Think about that. What you call caution, what you label as being realistic, is often nothing more than fear wearing a respectable mask. And there you sit, paralyzed by a thought that doesn't even belong to you. A thought implanted by parents who were afraid themselves, by teachers who wanted compliance, by a society that prefers you docile and predictable. You repeat the same excuses day after day, year after year. I'm just not the type of person who... I don't have what it takes to... Maybe someday when the timing is right. These mantras of mediocrity feel safer than admitting the brutal truth. You've chosen to live as a slave to your own imagination. And do you know what the most insidious part of this arrangement is? Fear doesn't need to shout to control you. It whispers. It whispers with your own voice in those quiet moments before sleep. It murmurs in the background of your thoughts until you can no longer distinguish between its voice and your own authentic desires, until you truly believe you're too weak, too unprepared, too unworthy to face it. But I'll tell you something your mind will instinctively reject. Something so radical that your psychological immune system will fight against it. Fear is destroyed with a single thought. Are you ready for it? Nothing makes sense. Feel that momentary disorientation? That subtle emptiness opening up inside you? That's the door to freedom. Because when you truly understand that nothing holds absolute meaning, that meaning is created, not discovered, you also understand that fear is just an invention, a fiction you've clung to in order to avoid accepting the vertigo of complete freedom. Let's be specific. Think about the last time you were terrified of failing at something important. Remember that sticky feeling in your chest, the tightness in your throat, the racing thoughts that kept you up at night? Now, think about what actually happened next. Exactly. In most cases, nothing close to your catastrophic fantasy materialized. The monsters your mind conjured dissolved in the light of reality. Most of your fears are ghosts that evaporate as soon as you decide to walk toward them. But you prefer to stay frozen, imagining apocalyptic scenarios while your one precious life burns away in waiting. Nietzsche said that man is a bridge, not an end. Do you understand the profound truth in those words? You are not a fixed entity. You are not a statue carved in immutable stone. You are movement, transition, becoming. Every time fear paralyzes you, you are denying your most essential nature, that of transforming into something different, something bigger, something freer. But I must warn you, this process is not comfortable. It's not a gentle awakening with birds singing and sunlight streaming through curtains. It's brutal, because you will have to look directly at everything you've tried to bury under the comfortable blanket of routine. You'll need to excavate the origins of your fear. Do you want to know why you're so terrified of failing? The real reason beneath all the rational explanations you've constructed? Because your entire identity is built on the illusion that if you're not perfect, if you don't succeed in everything you attempt, you don't deserve to exist. You were taught, explicitly or implicitly, to fear disapproval more than death itself, to treat criticism as an existential threat, to see rejection as confirmation of your deepest suspicion that you are fundamentally unworthy. But here's the secret they never told you. No one cares as much as you think. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's liberating. People are too consumed by their own fears, their own insecurities, their own mental dramas to maintain a permanent record of your failures. They're too busy trying not to drown in their own anxieties to keep score of yours. And yet you keep feeding the fantasy that if you stumble, the world will stop to point and stare, that your mistakes will become the centerpiece of other people's conversations, that your imperfections will define you in the eyes of everyone who matters. Do you want the harshest truth? Most people won't even remember your mistakes after 48 hours, but you'll turn those same mistakes into chains, into invisible tattoos you wear with a strange pride. Because it's more comfortable to say, "I can't move forward," than to take responsibility for taking the first step. Listen carefully. Every time you sink into that familiar anxiety that freezes you in place, you're choosing to live as a spectator of your own life. You sit in the back row watching as opportunities pass by, waiting for someone to appear and rescue you from your self-imposed limitations, hoping for a magic formula that will make the discomfort of growth disappear. But no one is coming to save you. No one can uproot that fear except you. No one else holds the key to your mental prison. And it's not a matter of motivational quotes or positive thinking. It's a matter of making a cold, clear decision. The thought that destroys fear is not a pretty affirmation you repeat in front of your bathroom mirror. It's an act of war against your own mind. It's pronouncing these words and believing them until they tear apart your old perception. None of this matters so much. There is no invisible court judging each of your moves. There is no permanent record of your failures being kept in some cosmic ledger. There is no jury that will sentence your worth based on how perfectly you perform. The meaning of all this, of your successes and failures, your anxieties and aspirations, is invented by you. And if today you decide your fear is irrelevant, then it is. But of course, you don't want to accept that responsibility, because freedom is a vertigo you'd rather not feel. Nietzsche called it the abyss. That sensation that if everything lacks an imposed meaning, then you are responsible for building your own. And if you fail at that, you can't blame anyone or anything else. Do you see it now? The true origin of your fear isn't failure itself, it's freedom. The terrifying possibility that you are the author of your experience, that no one is coming to write the script for you, that the blank page of possibility is yours to fill or to leave empty. Do you want to know what happens when you stop fearing? Silence. The brutal silence of discovering that everything you feared was a reflection in a mirror that doesn't exist. And in that silence, a space opens that no one can fill for you, a space where you will have to decide what to do with your existence. And that decision is so powerful, so pregnant with possibility, that it scares you more than any imaginary monster ever could. Look around you. Observe how most people live trapped in the cage of their own fear. They shout a lot, they criticize even more, but they don't move. Because moving implies acknowledging that other people's judgment has no real power over you. That approval is a mirage you've been chasing across a desert of your own making. And if you lose that pursuit, you might no longer recognize yourself. You cannot afford that fate. If you want to break free from this prison, you will have to be ruthless with your own excuses. Every time your mind tells you that you are not enough, respond with this thought: nothing matters, neither your failure nor your success. neither the opinions of those who never risked anything nor the praise of those who did. Everything is transient. Everything is smoke. And when you truly understand this, when you feel it burning in your guts like a cold fire, fear becomes an anecdote, a distant voice you can choose to ignore. Do you know the greatest trick fear has played on you? Convincing you that it's necessary, that it protects you from danger, that it keeps you safe in an unpredictable world. But in reality, fear is a blackmailer, a parasite that feeds on your vital energy and gives nothing valuable in return. If you don't pay attention to it, it withers. If you stop mentally narrating every potential catastrophe, it runs out of fuel. I want you to think about this seriously. How many opportunities have you lost by convincing yourself you weren't ready? How many connections have you missed because you were afraid of rejection? How many experiences have you denied yourself because you couldn't guarantee they would be perfect? Life didn't pause while you deliberated. Time continued its relentless march while you worshipped fear as if it were an oracle of truth. But today can be different. Today can be the day you destroy that false idol with a single thought. Everything you fear is a mental construction, nothing more. And if it is a construction, you can tear it down. Because even if right now you feel incapable, even if your heart pounds violently at the mere thought of stepping outside your comfort zone, the truth is, you've always had the ability to ignore that voice. You've always possessed the power to act despite it. Now, as we begin to dissect the nature of fear, let's turn our attention to something even more fundamental, the identity trap that keeps your fear alive. Because fear doesn't exist in isolation. It's interwoven with the story you tell about who you are, the mask you've worn for so long that you've forgotten it's not your face. Think of your identity as a costume you've been wearing since you learned to behave according to others' expectations. A disguise you've polished over years until it became so convincing that even you believed it was real. This identity, this self-image you protect so fiercely, is the second jailer after fear. And it's no coincidence that both feed off each other in a perfect symbiosis of limitation. Your fear needs a fragile identity to thrive. Your identity, in turn, needs fear to stay intact. Because if one day you wake up and decide you can be someone different, someone who acts despite fear, someone who embraces uncertainty as a pathway to growth, your carefully constructed mask begins to crack. And that prospect terrifies you more than any external threat ever could. Do you feel the uncomfortable truth in this? The most perverse mechanism of your mental prison? You don't fear what happens outside nearly as much as you fear the possibility that your own definition of yourself might become obsolete. If you have always seen yourself as the cautious one, the rational one, the one who plays it safe, then the idea of acting boldly threatens to destroy the story you've been telling all your life. The narrative that makes you recognizable to yourself when you look in the mirror each morning. It's more comfortable to be the one who suffers than the one who changes. Because suffering, as painful as it is, feels familiar. Transformation, on the other hand, is uncharted territory. Nietzsche expressed this paradox with brutal clarity when he wrote, "One must have chaos within oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But no one warned you about the price of that chaos. No one prepared you for the silent mourning that comes with abandoning your old identity. The grief of watching the narrative you used to justify yourself dissolve into nothing. And that's where many people fail. They cling to a broken version of themselves, as if it were a life preserver in a stormy sea, even if it hurts them. Even if it chains them to mediocrity. They prefer to hold on rather than face the void of not knowing who they are without their limitations. Because if you let go of that comfortable identity, what remains? The uncomfortable silence of total responsibility. The certainty that every choice, every step, every mistake will be yours alone to claim. And if you dare to look at yourself without that mask, if you truly examine the nature of your so-called personality, you'll discover something few are willing to accept. Everything you believe defined you is circumstantial. That shyness you've nurtured for decades, that risk aversion you're so proud of, that tendency to overthink until paralysis sets in. None of these are inherent traits of your personality. They are protection strategies, childish refuges you've perpetuated into adulthood. And here is the most uncomfortable truth. If you can recognize that your identity is built on a tacit pact with fear, then you can also betray that pact. You can tear down that facade with a single act of brutal honesty, admitting you have no idea who you could become if you stop defining yourself by your limitations. The question is whether you're willing to face that abyss, because the moment you let go of your old self-image, you become unexplored territory. And that demands a courage few possess, the courage to exist without a script. If you dare to make this leap, you'll discover that identity is as malleable as any thought, as fluid as water taking the shape of whatever container holds it. Today, you believe you're a certain type of person because you've spent years confirming it with your actions. Every time you give in to fear, you reinforce that label. Every time you choose safety over growth, you solidify the prison walls. But the label is not a fact, it's a habit, and every habit can be broken. Do you perceive the liberation in this realization? This is the second thought that can free your life. You are not the person you believe yourself to be. You are the provisional result of your past decisions. And if your decisions change, you change with them. This isn't poetic license or New Age philosophy, it's biology. Your brain physically rewires itself based on what you repeatedly practice. You practice cowardice, you become more cowardly. You practice boldness, you become bolder. That's simple, that brutal. And here comes the most twisted part of this realization. Most people will never allow themselves this metamorphosis. Not because they can't change, but because changing would mean admitting they've spent years, perhaps decades, holding on to a useless disguise. They prefer to defend their wounded identity than accept they could have chosen something different all along. The idea that freedom has been available this entire time is simply unbearable. Because if you could always change and you didn't, then there are no excuses left, no external circumstances to blame, no inherent limitations to hide behind. I'll tell you bluntly, every time you choose to feed your old identity with statements like, "This is just how I am," you are choosing fear. You are signing an invisible contract that perpetuates your slavery to a version of yourself that was never the full truth. But you can break that contract right now. You can tear it up in this very moment, and if you do, you'll feel a disorienting mix of relief and panic. Because when you no longer define yourself by your limitations, you also don't have a familiar script to cling to, no predetermined role to play, no comfortable excuses to fall back on. Nietzsche anticipated this struggle when he spoke of the Übermensch, often translated as the Overman or Superman, a being who is not defined by inherited values but by what he decides to create for himself. Most people will never come close to this ideal because it implies a kind of internal demolition few are willing to endure. But if you're still engaged with these words, it means something in you senses it's time. Time to betray your old self. Time to declare war on your comfortable identity. Time to step into the vertigo of authentic freedom. And here is an invitation not meant for everyone. Stop holding on to that dying version of yourself. Abandon the mask you present to the world, not to become someone perfect, but to have the possibility of choosing who to be each day. That is the greatest privilege you can conquer. The ability to be the author of your own identity instead of an actor repeating a mediocre role. Remember this, your fear cannot survive without your complicity. Your limiting identity cannot perpetuate itself without your consent. If today you decide to break both packs, a terrifying void awaits you. But it is also the only place where authentic freedom can flourish. And perhaps that vertigo is the best reminder that you are truly alive. Now, as we move deeper into this journey of liberation, let's confront the final obstacle that keeps most people trapped, the desperate need for certainty. Because even though you may now understand that fear is merely a thought and that your identity is a self-imposed prison, there remains a childish longing beating deep inside you. The hope that somewhere there exists a formula, a manual, a guarantee that everything will turn out well if you just do the right things in the right order. I'm sorry to tell you, but that certainty doesn't exist, and you won't find it here or anywhere else. Life is not an algorithm you can crack. It is not a puzzle with a single solution. It is a chaotic stage where nothing is permanent, where everything you believe solid can collapse from one day to the next. And the sooner you accept that your security is a myth, the sooner you'll be able to move without fear of losing it. Nietzsche said it with fascinating contempt for mediocrity. All truly great things are born amid dangers. Do you now understand why you've never felt that greatness stirring in your chest? Because you've spent years fleeing from any risk, dreaming of a refuge that exists only in your imagination, postponing life until conditions are perfect, which they never will be. But here comes the final twist. The revelation that can transform that void into a sacred space. If nothing is certain, then everything is possible. If there are no guarantees, there are also no limits. If there is no meaning given to you, you have the absolute freedom to invent your own. That is the paradox your mind has feared so much, that your destiny is unwritten, that you alone must get your hands dirty to trace its path. So ask yourself this question without mercy. Will you keep asking permission to exist? Will you continue begging to be approved, validated, blessed to try? Because if the answer is yes, then no matter what insights you gain from these words, your life will continue being a theater of excuses, a performance for an audience that isn't even paying attention. But if the answer is no, if you decide today is the day of your personal insurrection, then everything changes. Your way of looking at yourself in the mirror changes. Your way of walking through the world changes. Your relationship with fear, with your past, with the memory of every mistake changes. Because when you stop demanding certainties, when you accept chaos as part of the experience, you become something no criticism can destroy, a human being walking their own edge without needing permission. This is typically the moment when many people disconnect, when they close the video or put down the book because it's easier to swallow a motivational phrase than to face the raw responsibility of freedom. But you're still here, and that means part of you is not willing to go back to sleep, a part of you that has grown tired of begging for reassurance in all the wrong places. So if you've made it this far, give yourself this gift. Let your old version die. Say goodbye with gratitude if you must, but don't invite it back tomorrow. Don't give it more power than you've already granted it for years. Today, you can start moving differently. Today, you can let go of the need for a risk-free future and embrace vertigo as the fuel that has always been waiting for you. Because in the end, fear is nothing more than the shadow projected by your own greatness. The greater your potential, the larger the shadow. The more significant your capacity for impact, the more intimidating the fear that stands in your way. Let me show you how to apply these philosophical insights in practical terms, how to transform these ideas from abstract concepts into lived experience. First, you must understand that destroying fear doesn't happen through battle, but through recognition. You don't fight fear, you see through it. The next time you feel that familiar tightness in your chest, that paralysis of overthinking, try this radical approach. Instead of struggling against the sensation, simply observe it. Notice how your mind races to construct elaborate stories about what might go wrong. Watch how it presents these fantasies as if they were inevitable facts. Observe the physical sensations without attaching meaning to them. And then introduce the thought that dismantles the entire structure. None of this matters as much as I believe it does. Say it to yourself not as a comforting lie, but as a recognition of the universe's indifference to your temporary struggles. As an acknowledgement that in the grand scope of existence your fear is insignificant. This is not nihilism, it's liberation. When you truly grasp that your failures and successes are equally temporary, fear loses its foundation. When you recognize that no single moment defines you unless you grant it that power, anxiety becomes optional. Second, you must begin the deliberate practice of betraying your old identity. This doesn't mean changing everything overnight. It means consciously choosing actions that contradict your limiting self-definition. If you've always seen yourself as shy, force yourself to speak first in a group setting. If you've defined yourself as indecisive, make choices quickly without the usual deliberation. If you've built an identity around playing it safe, take one calculated risk each week. Each time you act contrary to your established patterns, you create a crack in the prison walls. You demonstrate to yourself that your identity is not fixed but fluid, that you can, in fact, become someone new through deliberate choice. Third, you must embrace the discomfort of uncertainty as a sign of growth rather than danger. Most people mistake the vertigo of freedom for anxiety. They interpret the groundlessness of possibility as a threat. But what if that sensation, that mixture of excitement and fear that makes your stomach drop, is not something to avoid? What if it's actually the feeling of being fully alive? Try this experiment. The next time you feel that vertigo before taking action, don't retreat from it. Don't try to calm yourself down. Instead, lean into the sensation. Become curious about it. Explore its contours without judgment. You may discover that what you've been fleeing isn't danger at all, but the exhilaration of existing without artificial constraints. The thrill of stepping off the prescribed path into the wilderness of your own making. Remember, fear is just a thought, and thoughts don't govern those who recognize their nature. Your limiting identity is just a habit, and habits can be broken through conscious choice. The need for certainty is just a childish longing, and growing up means embracing the beautiful chaos of unlimited possibility. As we reach the conclusion of this journey, I want to leave you with a question that will gnaw at you from the inside until it forces you to act. What would you do if you knew you didn't need everything to go right to feel alive? Think about it, sit with it, let it percolate through the layers of your conditioned mind. When that question starts to make you uncomfortable, when it begins to agitate the foundations of your comfortable limitations, that's when you'll know something new has sprouted inside you, something that can never be uprooted by fear again. If this philosophical exploration has stirred even one fiber of your being, if there was a moment when you felt your mask begin to crack, I invite you to take one concrete step today, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Today, Choose one action that contradicts your fearful identity. One step toward the person you would be if fear had no vote in your decisions. One movement in the direction of authentic freedom. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to be visible to others, but it must be real, because the journey from fear to freedom doesn't happen through contemplation alone. It happens through action, through the willingness to live as if your limitations were already overcome. Remember this as you move forward: vertigo is not your enemy. It is the sensation of your wings finally opening, the feeling of space rushing around you as you step off the edge of everything you thought you knew. And perhaps that sensation, that mixture of terror and exhilaration, is not something to overcome. Perhaps it is something to cultivate, to cherish, to recognize as the truest signal that you are finally living instead of merely existing. Fear is just a thought, and today you can choose a different thought. A thought that opens doors instead of building walls. A thought that liberates instead of imprisons. The thought that nothing matters as much as your freedom to become what you've always been beneath the mask of limitation. Step into that freedom now, not because you're ready, but because you're alive. And being alive means embracing the vertigo of unlimited possibility as the fuel for a life worth living.